to everyone else. So great to see you,
Yes,
Pastor Phil. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about today.
yes. And I just want to remind people, please take time to let us know that you're watching. Any comments, and if you have any questions, later on we'll be able to maybe answer those questions, and be sure to share it. That's how this gets out. It'll be a blessing to others. Well, we have been, let me just kind of talk about the last several conversations. We were talking about the church primarily. We took a look back. We were talking about God's restoration, more on not so much on a micro level, but on a macro level. So we've been looking at the church that Jesus said he would build, what the church went through, the reasons for moves of God, revivals, and what God is bringing forth as far as the church is concerned, and that promise that he gave, that he would build this overcoming church, and it would literally bring the glory of God, a knowledge of the glory of God into the earth. We're going to begin a conversation. The same idea of God is a God of restoration, but we're going to come back to a place of how personal that means to us. And I believe we're going to explore some of the riches of salvation and redemption. But I want to say this, and I'm going to read a scripture, and we'll talk about it. You can't really fully appreciate what's provided for us sometimes unless you realize, you look at the before and the after picture. Even advertisers know that. When they get you to want to buy that new piece of gym equipment, they'll be sure to show you somebody that looks like they are in desperate need of working out, and you feel like, I could identify with that guy. And because you don't want to look like that anymore. And then they show you the possibility of the after picture, what you could look like. And the word of God presents both the same. So let's go to the beginning. What did God originally have in store when he made man, even in the scheme of creation? So I'm going to go right to the beginning. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them, meaning mankind, have dominion. It goes on talking about over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, the cattle, over all the earth. Verse 27 says, so then God created man in his own image. And in the image of God created he him, both male and female, he created. And then verse 28, it says, then God blessed them. And now God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, even subdue it, and have dominion over every living thing upon the earth. So in those three verses, we have not only the fact of God's creation, but we have the reason for God's creation of man. So, Pastor Robert, let's begin to talk about that. I actually see three things, and maybe you could comment and we could talk about this. There's three areas we've got to see that God intended. God is invisible, but he wanted a visible representation of himself in the scheme of creation. The word image. An image is a construct of something that speaks of something else. I used to live in Boston. Let me say this. And before they had the big dig, whenever I went on Route 93, on my right, if I was going north to New Hampshire, I passed this obelisk, and it reminded me, it was set up, it was an image to remind everybody of the Battle of Bunker Hill. That famous battle in the Revolution where Colonel Prescott said, don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes, when the British Navy was coming. And I wasn't there 200 and some years earlier. I didn't hear the sound of muskets. I didn't smell the smoke of fire. But every time I saw that image, my mind went to that event, because that's what an image does. It brings you, it reflects something else. Likeness is moral character. I need somebody, God said, that is like me. It speaks of the moral character and the expression of life. And then that translates into man having dominion, that he would have authority within the scheme of creation, man being built, having a relationship with God and union with God. But out of that, it speaks of man's place in the earth. So there's a real high calling for man. This is the beginning of the before
Yes.
picture.
Yes. So just before we move from that, the original state of man and God's creation and the beauty of it all, man is the climax of creation. So when
Yes.
God makes man, so one of the things I notice when I read Genesis, we'll find God expressing himself in creation, manifesting his glory in creation. He creates, calls it good. He continues to create, calls it good.
Yeah.
Finally, he makes man. And when he makes man, he calls it very good.
Very
And
good.
then he stops creating,
Mm.
as though man is the climax and culmination of creation, as though God says, this is the closest expression of myself that I could make outside of myself.
Yeah.
And there is no room for improvement upon it. There's nothing else to be added to it. And on the seventh day, God rests. He ceases to create. So that speaks to something about the nature of man in his original state. And as you touched on, Pastor Phil, and so much even propounded here and explained, that is this: man was created for relationship with God like no other being, even higher than the angels
Yes.
and the order of angels. There is something in man that has a power and a capacity in his original state to relate to God like no other being or object that God had ever created. In that, man has been given powers, and man has been given ultimately, as you speak about, a dominion and an authority that God created man in. In fact, he was to use that authority. Now we're going to segue probably here. He's to use that authority to protect his original state and to guard that garden and to
And
keep it.
yeah, and you
And
know, with the
yeah,
word dominion, we could see right away how that the creation of man, God has a kingdom in mind. We've spoken in the past, we'll continue speaking about the kingdom of God. That's not a New Testament concept. It's a creation concept. It's right from the beginning. You know, I wanted to share when you said that man was made for a relationship with God, and this is so important. When you think of the three when you think of the three kingdoms in this regard, there's a plant kingdom, an animal kingdom, and the creation of man of living things. And the plants, they have a body. The animals have body, soul. That's why we could relate to our pets. There could be an emotional connection, and there's that kind of union. They become part of the family. But God is spirit. And so man is not just a higher form of animal life. Man is body, soul, and spirit.
and
He
only yes, and
so he
only
gave man a capacity, a unique capacity to relate to God and connect with God in fellowship and in union.
beautiful, Pastor Phil, and only in the case of man is it said God breathed the breath of life in him. So that is not just talking about animating man to life because all the animals were already animated to life. It speaks of something supplemental, something additional,
Mhm.
something unique. When he breathed the breath of life in him, it is talking about a spiritual quality, a spiritual capacity that the animal kingdom does not have, an ability to reason, an ability to make moral choice, an ability to relate to God in ways other than any animal. Animals are wonderful. They're amazing. Some of the things animals could do and learn and so on and so forth. It's just incredible. We're finding out more and more about animals, and they really are amazing species. That being said, there is something distinct and unique about man, and that is his
Yes,
capacity to relate to God and to make determinations, and ultimately, what you were talking about when you mentioned the kingdom, to be vice regents of God in
Yeah.
terms of dominion. We were created to reign with him, to have dominion along with him, not to be as God, not to be equal to him in any capacity, but to reflect him in such a way that we become vice regents of his.
You know, there's the language of Psalm 8 in light of what you just said. David kind of picks this up and he says, "Oh Lord, our Lord, how excellent is your name in all the earth." And then David talks about creation being the work of God's fingers and the beauty of creation. He said, "But what is man?" He said that you're mindful of him. You know, he's saying is you're not focused on Everest, you're not focused on the Grand Canyon, as glorious as that is. Man's vision is always on man. He said, "What is man that you're mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit him?" But he uses this phrase of what you just said. You made him to have dominion. So built into man actually is the desire to exercise dominion. We were made for that. And so we'll talk about the fall, but when man does not have dominion, things begin to break down in man because he was never built and made to be dominated by any aspect of creation. He was made to have dominion. And God wired man that way.
Very good, very good. And that dominion was made to be had in unison and in
Yes,
harmony with God. But when it is corrupted and when it is fallen, as we move forward in this, it becomes thwarted and twisted and becomes a
absolutely.
wrong kind of dominion and a kind of autonomous thing where man is at the center of his own attempts at dominion, and no longer is God the one who is being that brings a good point, Pastor Phil, that you touched on the image and the likeness.
Yeah,
The image speaks about something of our constitution.
yeah,
The likeness speaks of our resemblance.
that's good.
While the two are not to be disconnected in any way, they are inextricably bound together. There is a
Right.
distinction between image and likeness.
Yes.
Image is the capacity and the potentiality of our being because of how we are created, and then the image is the byproduct of that, or the
Right.
likeness is the byproduct of that. Because we are connected to God, we are like God. Because we have been created for a harmony with him, such as none other, we now resemble him like none other.
Right. Now in the scope now of the fall, let's go to the fall of
Yeah,
man. Because this is really now the before picture. Every aspect, if we look at image, likeness, and dominion, every aspect of those three have been affected by the fall. If we think about the image, it's almost like sin brought graffiti to the image. Something that's so beautiful became so indelibly marred by the disobedience, by the transgression. The image became twisted. No longer was man the face of the invisible God within the scope of creation. He's got a marred face, he's got a marred image. God is no longer properly represented through a fallen man. And of course, his likeness, as you said, these two things are related. Man in his essential nature uh, and moral goodness has been twisted. And now we have sinful ways that could speak of the very fall of the nature of man. And of course, the twistedness of dominion. Not only is man now dominated by different elements, even the dominion of man is being used with wrong motivations or maybe for manipulation or to conquer other men. If you notice in the list, it wasn't that men were to have dominion over men, but over all the earth as a manager, as one that would keep the earth in proper order.
So
But now that dominion has also been impacted and impaired by the fall of man.
beautiful.
And I think actually that's what war is all about. A war is a conflict of dominion.
Wow.
And that's where wars came from. And all of this from the
So
fall.
so so there's a proper expression of dominion, and then there's a sin tainted expression of dominion, and the
Yes.
two are at odds. There is
Yes.
one that comes in God and from God, by that relationship with God, and then there is that thwarted, twisted, sin stained expression of it, where man is at the center of trying to create his own superiority and so on and so forth, which really
Absolutely.
speaks to the nature of the fall. Which really speaks to the nature
Yes.
of the fall. Because when we speak about the fall, we're talking about man being made for relationship with God, given everything necessary for relationship from God as a dependent being upon his creator. But he is created in an upright position, uh, but not immutably so, not
Right.
where that cannot be forfeited, not where that cannot be altered. He is put in this garden and is given all things to enjoy, so long as he follows the Lord and centers his life in the Lord and does the few things God said to do. And one of them was to, I always talk about, we always talk about the tree that God said, don't take of this tree. But
Right.
before that, he said to dress the garden and to keep it. And keeping it did not just mean taking care of the garden, it meant to guard it and to
Yes.
protect it. Satan had no business coming in, but man had let down his guard.
Yeah.
And it was because he let down his guard and already began to move into the realms of disobedience that Satan was allowed to enter, and that he began to entertain his thoughts, began to entertain his suggestions, began to buy into those suggestions, ultimately violating his relationship with the Lord.
And don't you think when the serpent, as he's identified in the book of Revelation, who is Satan, he becomes the dragon in Revelation, that old serpent who is the devil. Uh this is also the cost factor when man doesn't exercise the dominion he had.
That's it.
Because even if, let me put it this way, even if there's a serpent in your garden, it's your garden in the sense that you've got jurisdiction, you've got dominion. And when man did not walk in that dominion, then he became subject and was dominated,
Wow. Wow.
you know,
Very
by
good.
something he really had dominion over
Very good.
in that way.
Very
And
good.
so we're
Pastor
going to
Phil,
see. Yeah,
I've never discussed this with you. We're just in conversation, so things you say just spark thoughts in me, and we are going somewhere, but sometimes we go here and there because things
it's a
spark ideas.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me just throw this out there. And I don't know how you feel about it, but and I'm not gonna make this something a hill I'll die on, but let me just throw this out there. We've so often we've so often thought of Satan as a snake,
Hmm.
but the Bible doesn't say he's a snake,
Right.
as he's a serpent. And and just as it says he's a dragon, just as it says he's a lion. So which is he? What he is a personality. He is a creation of God that has fallen himself. I don't believe that the serpent in the garden was a talking snake.
Hmm.
I believe it was just a depiction of Satan himself when it calls him a serpent. I think Adam knew well who he was, and I think he knew that he was to prevent him from coming in, but allowed him to come in.
Yeah.
And the point being that there are many words to express what the devil is. It doesn't even say that he was the most subtle beast of the earth. He says he was more subtle than all the beasts of the earth. He was not as the beasts of the earth. There was
Right.
just nothing else to compare him to. So he is an entity of himself who stands in opposition to God,
Hmm.
and now comes because he cannot overthrow God and cannot bring ruin to God. He tries to bring ruin to that which is closest to God, that which is made in his image and that which is made in his likeness. He is a spoiler of God's plan, if you will, or an attempter to spoil God's plan. What we're going to talk
Absolutely.
about is to show how God's plan cannot ultimately be destroyed.
Well, and also we're going to see how that in this scheme of creation in its perfection in the natural, like you said, man was the cherry, and then God ceased from his works. What we're going to see is how that the fall of man has affected every aspect of man, but we're also going to see how that God, what was God's original intent? God stays committed to his original intent. And so the creator God will step into the fallen situation and reveal himself as Redeemer God. And even the nature of the fall gives way to show us another side of the glory of God. It's not that God made man to fall, and it's not that God didn't know man would fall, but God uses the occasion deliberately to involve himself after the fall when it seems like all is lost. Like for man, the only thing probably that should be done is scrap it all. Let's start again. Like so oftentimes maybe we do when things get messed up when we go to build something. God said, I'm going to show you another side of who I am, even in the fallen world, and I'll step into it. And this is what we're going to emphasize. This
So,
is tremendous.
so God uses the occasion of the fall for the greater revelation of his person and the
Yes,
greater expression of his glory. And there are things that come forth from God after the fall and because of the fall that could not come forth apart from the fall. So
exactly.
which in itself is is detrimental to the glory of God doesn't work out that way. It works out instead to the glory of his person. Now, let me just interject one of my favorite verses here in this regard in the New Testament, because Peter writes, and he talks about this great salvation, this
Yes.
unfolding expression of God's goodness and grace and glory that he is going to share and going to demonstrate in his retrieval and his redemption and his restoration of mankind. And just let me read it. Of this salvation, Peter says in 1 Peter 1 and 10, of this salvation, the prophets have inquired and searched carefully. They're prophesying things that they don't even fully comprehend. And they're seeking to know and understand these things. And they're desirous to know what exactly they specify and what they mean. And here he says, they prophesied of the grace that would come to you, searching what or what manner of time the Spirit of Christ who was in them was
Mm.
indicating when he testified beforehand the sufferings of Christ and the glories that would follow. To them it was revealed that not to themselves, but to us, that they were ministering the things which now have been reported to you, though those who have preached the gospel to you, through those who have preached the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven. And then I love this,
Go ahead.
things which angels desire to look into. There
Mm.
is such a display and revelation of the glory of God in redemption, in God bringing man back and all of his provision in this regard, that the angels, it's as though the angels peer from the balconies of heaven to
My,
observe
my,
these
my,
things,
my, my.
to watch these and behold these things, gleaning more and more knowledge of the greatness and the immensity and the enormity and the infinity, the eternality of him whom we serve. This God is unfathomable, but he is learned by his glory, and his glory is the expression of his nature and person in the acts of redemption that you and I are the beneficiaries of. I didn't mean to preach, but this goes
No,
right.
brother. You know, as you're talking, my heart's being stirred. And in Hebrews 2 uses this phrase, how shall we escape if we neglect so great of salvation?
So great.
So great. And I think that there's a greatness, not just are you saved? What are the implications? We're kind of, by the grace of God in our conversation, we want to just begin to explore some of the greatness of this salvation. I think about Ground Zero, the Twin Towers. You talked about the angels. It's almost like the angels looking over that balcony and Ground Zero. Remember the great smoke? I think there was smoke for at least a month because of all the debris. And suddenly the smoke clears. And imagine this, after the smoke clears because of such a great fall, something more beautiful is there. Something that is beyond what was there originally. Because God got involved, he stepped into Ground Zero.
Wow.
And wait until we talk about, because really when Jesus came, it's God entering man's Ground Zero. I mean, wow. Oh my goodness, beautiful. Brother.
Two things, Pastor Phil, you touch on that we need to speak to, and then we'll get right into this. And that is this. One, God's redemption, God's salvation is not even just a bringing us back to what once was. It is superior to that.
Right.
Because there is a knowledge of God that could not have been known apart from the fall. There is a knowledge of him that is experienced, encountered, and understood through Jesus Christ. That could not be understood, experienced, or comprehended apart from him. So we're talking about something so great, something so enormous. Then the second point, this will take us a good segue right to where we want to really begin this, and that is this. We cannot know the glory of the gospel unless we understand the plight of the fall.
Yes.
Unless we understand our condition without Christ, we cannot understand the glory of knowing him. We can't comprehend the latter without understanding the former. And I think a lot of times we miss the mark because we forget, or we don't understand, or we never fully comprehended how bad off we really were. And now what a great posture and position and place we stand in.
No question about it. We're going to see how the gospel is not only an answer, it is the answer for all the ills of society, which is a representation or the outworking of the ills of man's condition. Every breakdown in society, from the racial divide to the fractured family, to all kinds of looting and all kinds of murder, everything is the outworking at a social level of man's fall within his heart. And so I just believe that we're gonna really, God's gonna inspire that the gospel is the answer for everything. What Jesus came and what he came to provide and what he has provided. You know, I wanted to say this also. The immediacy of man's fall immediately affected his marriage. Now, we're not talking about marriage. What we're doing is now we're going to begin to highlight that fall and what we've inherited. When God created the woman, he formed man, but when he went and he took the woman out of the man, the first thing God called her was a helpmeet. God's declaration was, I'm going to make a counterpart for the man, but he always had his work in mind, a helpmeet. She's literally going to help him, and together they will fulfill my purpose. When man looked at the woman, the first thing he called her is woman. She shall be bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. He found someone that he could relate to, that he could connect with on a relational level. And it was such a beautiful thing. But once man fell, what we find is that was the first relationship, other than the vertical, in the horizontal, that was ill impacted. We find that God says to the woman that he will now have dominion or seek to conquer you. So again, that dominion aspect was now turned on his counterpart, man wanting to dominate. But it said about the woman, she will desire, and it's not a nice word. It means that she'll desire to be in your place. And hence the battle of the sexes
Conflict.
begin.
Conflict.
In a fallen, cursed world, man seeking to dominate and a woman seeking to overtake. That was the fall. And then it says, in the day that they were created, in Genesis 5:2, their name was Adam. In other words, the two were a complete one. But now she becomes Eve. There's this separate identity. What I'm saying is this, without going headlong into talking about marriage, is immediately man's relationship to man suffered in the fall.
It speaks to,
yeah,
it speaks to the, instead of that unity and harmony in God, all things being as he wills, now there's this autonomy where each individual becomes a God unto himself and therefore is in conflict with one another because each is vying for the supremacy and asserting their autonomy.
yes,
And the conflict is evident. The corruption of the heart is such that it expresses itself in ways that are ungodly, not according to God's pattern, not according to his original intention, and not according to relationship with him, but instead by the severance of that relationship, man spiraling away from God and exercising his own thwarted sense of dominion and all that that signifies.
and even if it's not a war, the same spirit is at work when somebody's manipulating someone else in order to get their end, even within a relationship. So there may not be knives and weapons used, but it's the same kind of fallen nature at work to want to dominate, to want to get my intended end, and to lie, to manipulate. So really, the gospel, as we will explore this, is the only answer for true unity and harmony and oneness. It not only repairs the vertical, but the only hope for repair at the horizontal is the gospel and what Jesus came to provide.
Wow. So to stay on the track that we're leading to, let us say this. Adam acted for himself, but not for himself only. It is very important that we understand that Adam is not just an example of us.
Mm-hmm.
Adam is us.
Yeah.
He is the totality of the human race. There's really two ways theologically to look at this, Pastor Phil, and there have been those that have taken either side. One is to say that Adam was the human race and we all come from him, therefore we inherit what was in Adam. The other is to see Adam as a covenant head. He is the covenant head of the human race. So as it goes with Adam, so it goes with us.
Yeah.
He doesn't just act for himself. He acts for all mankind. And the consequences of his action affect all mankind.
Yes.
And this is what we mean when we talk about the fall of man. The fall of Adam and the fall of man are one and the same.
Yes.
They are consequential. They are inextricably tied together. There is so as it goes with Adam, so it goes with us. And now we're beginning to touch on what it is that we inherit from Adam.
So of all, when Paul says in Acts 17, when he talks about the nations of the earth, the ethnos, whether there's black skin, white skin, yellow skin, he said that all nations of the earth come from one blood, which comes from one man. So this fall, this same fall, it's not a skin color, it's not unique ethnic issue. It has affected all of mankind. And so the root cause, again, is not skin,
Very,
it's not culture, it's humanity.
very interesting, Pastor. Was that Acts 17? You said
Act 17.
Acts 17. That speaks really to the what I was referring to as the realist view. The realist view is this: we actually are descendants of Adam. We are physical, no matter what color, like as you say, no matter what color, what creed, what country, what point in time, we are all descendants of Adam. We have actually come from his loins. We have actually come from his seed. And there is a realist an understanding of that, that we are really connected to Adam, even biologically. And then Paul speaks to in Romans 5, where we probably really want to
We've got to, yeah, we're going to have to pick it up next week.
That it's not just that we're really connected to Adam in a physical, biological sense, but we're really connected to Adam in a covenantal sense.
Yes.
We're really connected to Adam in this idea that he is the covenant head of the human race. And God puts Adam in that garden, and Adam is acting not only for himself, he's acting for all mankind. And there are consequences of his action that have impacted us irrevocably. And I say irrevocably, but not redemptively, because Jesus is going to redeem it.
Well, and we're going to explore that. You want to join us next week. We're going to leave it there. We're going to continue to talk about what actually some of the aspects of the fall, but we're going to begin to appreciate and take a look at redemption. That's why it's so important. Jesus came from the tribe. Obviously, he came out of Israel, came specifically out of the tribe of Judah, but Luke indicates he came from the human race. In that regard, he was a son of Adam. Had he not come from Adam, then what he had to offer would have been limited to a select few. But because he's an offspring miraculously and incarnately from the human race, what he offers is to all mankind, no matter what tribe, no matter what color, because of we coming all from Adam. And so did the very seed that God prophesied, the seed of the woman that would crush the head of the serpent. But we need to pick up next week, man. My heart is brimming over.
What's difficult, Pastor Phil, is as you speak, 5,000 thoughts. The thoughts come through my mind so quickly I can't even. One comes and then you say something else and another comes. But let's leave it with this: the incarnation of Jesus is not just a nicety; it's a necessity.
It's a necessity.
It is him joining himself with us so that we might be joined to him. And that's enough right now to understand that God wasn't going to leave us in our original condition. His plan was not to just watch man spiral away from him and live separate from him and spend eternity without him. His plan was other than that. His purposes and decrees are other than that. And thank God for who Jesus is. We'll never understand the fullness of it unless we understand the depths of our plight. And we're beginning to touch on that. We'll dig deeper into it. But we are going to also comprehend and understand in a greater way the great glories of his grace in the person of his Son. There is no God like our God. His name is faithful and true.
Yes.
He's awesome in every way. And so we're just so glad you stayed with us for this first preliminary conversation. As we talked for just a few minutes before we started, Pastor Phil and I said, well, maybe this will be one, maybe it'll be two, maybe it'll be three. I think it's going to be at least three. But we want to cover some of these great things, and we're so glad you're watching us. Let us know you've watched. Remember, every Thursday morning at 8 a.m. is Power for Living. You could always watch us. We love when you watch us live, but you could always catch us later. Either way, make a comment, click a like, or share it in some way so that others can also hear, and it keeps us encouraged to continue to do these things. Pastor Phil, it's so good to see you today.
Oh, it's great to be with you, and I'm just, my heart's burning as we talk about the God who restores. And so God's got such a high calling for his creation of man. And
Hallelujah.
So this is wonderful. God bless every one of you. We love it when you join us. Tell someone else about it, comment, share it, and then let's come together again next week for Power for Living.
Amen. Have a blessed day.